So Halo Wars 2 has been out for a little while, and the story is pretty divisive, and in a post-Halo 5 world, that's not exactly a good thing for Halo. Halo 5's story was arguably a franchise-damaging story in the opinions of many, and unless Halo wanted the scars of Halo 5 to remain on the series for the foreseeable future, Halo's story needed help fast. Halo Wars 2 is the first Halo game after Halo 5, and what's brilliant about Halo Wars 2 is the opportunities it's set for itself. It's a spin-off that's not connected to the mainline Halo games, meaning it can tell a simpler story and act as a sort of vacation for the community from the nonsensical created story arc that's occurring in the Milky Way galaxy. It's featuring the return of Bungie-era characters that have mostly gone untouched since their adventure in Halo Wars about 8 years ago. In a day and age where new characters have little charisma, personality, or charm, and the classic returning characters are acting out of character in the eyes of many, it's refreshing that Halo Wars 2 will be acting as sort of a time capsule from a time when Halo was full of fun and witty characters like Johnson that fans could latch onto. I was fortunate enough to have gotten an early review copy about a week before the game release, and when I beat the game a while back, I knew that this was going to be a tough one to discuss for various reasons. Personally, I stayed away from all hype material due to the burns from Hunt the Truth still stinging fresh. I was excited about the look and tone of the game, but I expected very little from the narrative. But that being said, I can understand why others in the community did feel burned by the #KnowYourEnemy marketing campaign that promised this story of two old but experienced generals as they engage in a lethal game of chess with their armies over control of the Ark itself. People have been asking me my opinions on the story. Is it good? Is it bad? And so without further ado, let's talk about Halo Wars 2's story. Right off the bat, when Halo Wars 2 began, I knew this game would be a lot more structured and coherent than Halo 5. The game's score is the first thing you hear over black screen, and it did an artsy-fartsy thing that actually had me grinning. Everything is black and still, just like the Spirit of Fire's crew, dark, silent. You hear faint strings, a Halo choir, and other instruments begin getting louder and louder and louder, and then bam, the Spirit of Fire is there in the frame, awakening, coming to life, showing that the world of the crew on board is now reawakening. Now, while it may seem trivial right now, this moment meant a lot to me because it reassured me that the cutscenes were now being directed by people with a little bit more care and talent. Despite the flashy visuals of Halo 5 cinematics, the cutscenes always felt like they weren't being directed by a team who were experienced in cinematography and directing actors. Hell, Halo 5 doesn't even tell us the names of our main characters until after they put on all of their helmets, jump out of a pelican, are all wearing ridiculously complex armor with muted colors, and are lost in the sea of visuals. Oh, and they introduce themselves over a radio, so you don't even know who's talking, and you can't put a face to the name. The cutscenes had remarkably bad acting from actors who are otherwise really talented, which just makes me think they had a bad director, and amateurish shots that made noticeable attempts to mimic the techniques of popular Hollywood movies at the time, while failing to have a filming style or cohesion of their own. All throughout Halo Wars 2, the cutscenes and actors were brilliantly directed, and there really was this sense of professionalism in this game that Halo 5 lacked. Something I also appreciated from the actors specifically is the way they all tended to over-exaggerate their acting when it came to their facial expressions. Why is this important? Well, motion capture technology is still a growing technology in its infancy, and it still can't quite capture the very subtle expressions that we as humans will notice on other human beings. So when I see these actors in the cutscenes smile just a little bit wider than they normally would, or raise their eyebrows just a little bit higher than they normally would, it helped make these photorealistic models look more alive and elevate them out of the uncanny valley, where Halo 5 you'll notice a lot of really bizarre, dead-eyed moments from the character models. One cinematic moment that I want to talk about, because I did find it actually very good character building, is the way that the story begins with Cutter walking to an elevator so that he can meet Anders in the control bridge below. When we first see him, he has his hat off, and for a good while we don't see his eyes. You kind of get the idea that he had just listened to Serena's goodbye, and the reason that we don't see his eyes is when we get to this shot. When we finally see his eyes, we can see how damn old and just tired he looks. He puts on his hat, he steps into the elevator, and his eyes are hidden from us again. Until this shot, when he's seen smiling and giving off this warm, almost comforting performance while he's watching Anders just buzzing with excitement. Almost like he's a father who is smiling to himself as he sees all of his children full of energy after waking up in the morning. Even in the face of danger, Cutter inspires his troops. You get the sense that everyone looks up to Cutter, not just because he's a commander, but because he also has this warm and fatherly character about him in the way that he just knows what to say to reassure you that everything will be okay and bring out the best in you. But then there are little moments like this in the cutscenes that show that deep down, Cutter may be hurting on the inside, and he plays up the role of all-knowing and loving father so his troops feel safe behind him. He puts his crew's emotional state over his own. And this little moment just actually really made me like the character, and I do have to commend the writing and the directing and the actors involved because it is a small little sequence, but it was really clever in my opinion. Let's talk about Isabelle. She's essentially the only survivor on the Ark after Atriox completely murdered her friends and companions who she had been working with for months and months and months. When she's first found, she's scared, skittish, and acting out of line when she talks to the commanding officers due to the horrors she faced and the trauma of losing her friends. And over the course of the game and Cutter's ability to raise people up, she went from being scared and skittish to being angry at the Banished, and then reaching the point where we get to this scene where her anger got to its peak, and from a thematic sense, she used her rage to tear Atriox's ship in half and destroy it. She started the game as a scared tiny mouse, and eventually she overcame her fear and replaced it with a fury that she used to aid the Spirit of Fire. On paper, that's really awesome, but due to the rarity of the blur cutscenes and the extents that the RTS missions go to make sure that the story does not interfere, this character arc felt a bit rushed, and the arc itself can be missed if you just blink. During missions, the narrative can't go too deep into Isabelle's personal journey due to that interfering with the RTS gameplay, and we could potentially run the risk of it ending up like Halo 5 or Titanfall 1's online campaigns, where moments of the game feel like a bad radio drama because the characters are just talking over your radio while you mindlessly shoot things. I also felt that Isabelle's character didn't really need the AI gimmick. In fact, I feel that it would have been a lot easier for gamers to be able to connect with her if she was the last scientist alive who had been surviving on the Ark for months, and she's borderline suicidal when they find her due to the horrors she's physically survived. That being said, I do think that her character is a net positive, and I felt that the chemistry between her and Spartan Jerome was actually quite good. Speaking of Spartans, I really like Red Team in this game, and I mean I really like them in this game. In a day and age of Spartans being either emotionally tortured, bland, emotionless, or just unremarkable, it's nice to see Halo propping up Spartans as these ultimate badasses again that people are constantly blown away by. The way you hear the Marines idly chatting or looking at Red Team, you would think the Avengers themselves were in this game. One moment between Isabelle and Jerome in particular I want to point out is when Jerome took Isabelle and then leapt from the crashing Banished ship. This badass moment was almost like a perfect representation of something Halo's Spartans have been missing the last few years. The power fantasy aspect of the Spartans. I really hope that this tone is carried into the mainline Halos, and personally, I would love to see 343 scale back the Spartan 4s, or just straight up disband the Spartan 4 program, because players miss the Herculean power trip fantasy the idea of playing as one of these tiny handfuls of super soldiers brings. Whenever the game has a chance, it shows Red Team just being so cool, and you get the sense that they know how cool they are, and in some cases it almost feels like they're playing it up just to see how impressed they can make you. Like when he grabs her and jumps out of the ship, he knows exactly how cool and badass he is being, and he's doing it deliberately on purpose to blow her mind. I can talk on and on about what I liked about the characters and the directing and the mood and the soundtrack and the tone and the fun atmosphere they bring to the story, but what about the story itself? The goal of the game is to stop Atriox from taking control of a Halo ring that the Ark is creating and trying to find a way to send a distress signal to the Milky Way galaxy. And while the story itself is very straightforward and simple, I did find that the pacing of the story was incredibly unstable. Halo Wars 2 is an RTS, and due to this, Creative Assembly did a great job of making sure that the story never interfered with the levels and their individual identities. While I appreciated how hands-off the story was with character development and massive revelations unless it was a cutscene, I found that due to how long each level was and the rarity you got blur cutscenes, I would sometimes actually lose track of what exactly we were doing in the story. Sometimes you had to play almost like 3 levels at a time before you got a blur cutscene that reminded you what exactly you were doing narratively. This isn't a problem though, exclusive to Halo Wars 2. I've played many RTS games, and sadly this is just a common problem with storytelling in RTS games in general. Not every RTS game suffers from this problem, but a majority do. I also found the Banished to be a bit of a mixed bag. Overall, the Banished are really cool as an enemy faction, and I love the look of them, and I really appreciate that 343 didn't just make another Covenant remnant for us to fight. They may just be Red Covenant, but they at least have a different name, so it doesn't just feel like 343 is dragging the name Covenant across the lawn for as long as they can. Now, as captivating as Atriox, their leader, was whenever he was on screen, the story very much just consisted of Atriox getting his ass kicked mission after mission. I found that Decimus, his second in command, was way more intimidating than Atriox due to how he actually participated in the missions and made the most effort out of all the 3 baddies to put an end to us personally. The story ends with us never really even getting close to Atriox outside of literally the intro, and it left me really feeling unsatisfied about his character. It's the world's worst kept secret that there will be a Banished campaign DLC coming to Halo Wars 2 as discovered by data miners on the PC version, and when viewing Halo Wars 2 as an episodic story, one could make the argument that the reason the story consisted of Atriox getting beaten senseless is so that the Banished campaign, we can play as him and get our revenge and mess Captain Cutter up and his troops. Atriox is pissed at the end of this story, and that will lead as the primary motivation for the Banished campaign, humiliating Cutter as Cutter humiliated him. It's cool, I guess, but it was unbelievably risky of 343 to not inform us that Halo Wars 2's story would be episodic in nature, and people are still angry from Halo 5's cliffhanger ending, and Halo Wars 2 also ends on another unresolved story, and even has the balls to tease us with a Guardian at the end, as if we give a shit about the created story arc from Halo 5. Now, normally I would expect something better in terms of a story, but given where Halo is right now narratively, Halo Wars 2 is taking baby steps, which is a very good thing. After Halo 5, I didn't think I could invest myself in Halo's story again, and Halo Wars 2 re-sparked my interest thanks to a villain that, while being underused, is quite enjoyable and I would like to see more of him in the future, and the crew of the Spirit of Fire, who I would love to see enter the Milky Way galaxy and help just liven things up a bit. A good friend of mine, Hidden Xperia, made a very interesting point. He said Halo Wars 2 highlighted something that Halo has been doing wrong for a little while now with the UNSC, and he used the end of Halo 5 and Cutter's speech to explain his point. At the end of Halo 5, the Infinity makes a break for it when they see the Guardians taking over, and Lasky makes a point to say that they can't fight and they just have to run. In Halo Wars 2, Isabelle begs Cutter to turn tail and run from the Banished, which overwhelm the Spirit of Fire in both technology and numbers. A common criticism by people is that 343 has a very cynical and very critical approach to humanity, which can get quite tedious when Halo 5 is sending you to save planets full of people who are all in bad moods and giving you nasty looks. Cutter reminds her what the UNSC should be standing for, and why the new UNSC doesn't work in Halo. He shows her the power and the drive that the UNSC used to stand for. Humanity, outnumbered, outgunned, but never running and fleeing. Cutter's speech to Isabelle is almost like a criticism of the way the UNSC has been handled in new Halo games. Captain Cutter is almost addressing the end of Halo 5 directly, and making it clear he's gonna be bringing the soul of the UNSC back to Halo.
I see family, courage, and 1,000 heroes who swore to fight their way through hell before they'd ever turn their backs and run. And where you see one old ship, I see home. And that is always worth fighting for. Hoorah! So no, Isabelle, we won't be running anywhere today.
Sir, yes, sir.